welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker, and today I have a bit of a special treat for you guys. Something I've never done before, but one of my fans, Harry Stark, sent in an email to me with a video that he's made as a Christian apologist. He's done a great video, a short little 17-minute video kind of comparing Christianity and the evidence for Christianity and its truth compared to some of the other major world religions out there, and why Christianity, he thinks, is superior in that respect to other religions, and therefore the other religions are false and you should believe in Christianity. So yeah, out of respect for his great efforts here, I wanted to show that video with his permission. And he also asked me for a little bit of feedback on it. So I'm going to play his full 17-minute video in full without any interruptions or anything like that, so you can get the full context of what he said. And then at the end, I'm going to give kind of my review or my feedback as to some of the points that he said in the video. So with that said, enjoy the show. One quick announcement with RSM. So I mentioned I should have the show with David Kemble Cook already posted, but I also mentioned there was a special guest, Democracy of the Dead, who's another Christian apologist. He has that YouTube channel that, as well as his blog, that I think is a pretty great show. Initially, he agreed to come on my show, so I announced that he would be on, but I haven't heard anything back from him beyond that. He's just kind of ignoring me and that sort of thing when I'm trying to work out the details with him, so I have no idea what's going on with him or what happened. I'm assuming he's not going to be on the show at this point, but nonetheless, cool. He doesn't want to be on, that's fine. I still would say support his channel. I mean, he has great content and that sort of thing, and like I said, he's a fellow Christian, so I'll just give him that last little plug, but I'm assuming he won't be on the show just because he hasn't gotten back to any of my attempts to try and work the details out with him. So he's done. All right, cool. So let's move on, and here's the video from our fan, my fan Harry Stark. Let's see what he has to say.
You might have heard the claim that religions do not have any evidence. This is not an entirely true statement. Any person who holds to a religious position has some sort of evidence for their position. The evidence might be a spiritual experience, a written record, or a miracle claim. What is most important to evaluate is whether the written record is historically reliable and whether there are any alternative explanations that can account for the data to a greater extent and is the least ad hoc. In this presentation, the central claims of Buddhism, Polytheism, Islam, Mormonism, and Christianity will be evaluated. The following criteria will be used to evaluate the religions. 1. Are there any alternative explanations that are within reason? 2. When was the written record written down? 3. Is it a conspiracy theory? Buddhism will now be evaluated. What is the central claim of Buddhism? The central claim is that reincarnation perpetually occurs, where the aim is to reach nihilistic oblivion called nirvana. What is the evidence for reincarnation? The cited evidence of reincarnation is Ian Stevenson's studies about children with memories of past lives, allegedly. There are severe methodological issues of Stevenson's studies, and Stevenson himself has admitted that all cases have severe flaws. Even if someone assumes that the data in Stevenson's study is valid for the sake of argument, there are several alternative explanations that can account for the data better than reincarnation. One naturalistic alternative explanation is Morphic Resonance, which is a naturalistic process where self-organizing systems inherit a memory from previous similar systems by genetic similarity. Another naturalistic alternative explanation is akashic field and retro-recognition, where all human experience becomes part of a collective memory bank of the humankind to be read out again and again. Another naturalistic alternative explanation is memory bundles, which explains why so many memories are connected to a geographic region and connected to deceased family relatives. Another naturalistic alternative explanation is mental ocean theory, where consciousness is like an ocean and cups are sporadically taken out and eventually will lead to overlap, which explains why some memories overlap. Another naturalistic alternative explanation is mundane explanations, such as jealousy of the opposite sex. One supernaturalistic alternative explanation is demonic possession, which explains why certain children eventually forgot their memories and knew where their bodies were after death. Therefore, the central claim of Buddhism does not stand up to scrutiny and is false. Therefore, Buddhism is false. Polytheism will now be evaluated. Polytheism includes Hinduism, ancient Egyptian mythology, and ancient Greece mythology, to name a few. What is the central claim of polytheism? The central claim is that their gods have interacted with human beings. What is their evidence? Their evidence are written records about the exploits of the gods. What are the alternative explanations that can account for the data? One alternative explanation is that the written records were written in the genre of mythology, which is when something is written in the distant past without a specific time and space. Therefore, the document is not historical. Another alternative explanation is that the supernatural events in the written records are legendary developments. The written records were written down several centuries after the alleged events transpired. Therefore, the events are legendary. Another alternative explanation is that since the polytheistic gods are internal of time and space, the gods were used as replacements for natural phenomena. For example, Zeus was used to explain lightning. In light of scientific revolution by Isaac Newton, John Kepler, and Robert Doyle, among others, the explanatory power of the polytheistic gods became negligible. Therefore, the central claim of polytheism does not stand up to scrutiny and is false. Therefore, polytheism is false. Islam will now be evaluated. What is the central claim of Islam? The central claim is that Muhammad acquired the Quran from an angel, which stated that Jesus was a prophet and Jesus did not die on the cross, among other things. What is the evidence for this claim? The evidence is the written record named the Quran. What are the alternative explanations? The Quran was written in the 7th century, which are several centuries after the life of Jesus, and is a time when the eyewitnesses of Jesus were absent. Therefore, the Quran is not historically reliable when it comes to the life of Jesus. The Quran contradicts earlier non-biblical sources and the New Testament. The Roman historians Tacitus, Lucian, and Josephus, and the New Testament all claim that Jesus claimed to be God incarnate. The New Testament records that Jesus did die on the cross, which is the scholarly consensus. Therefore, the central claim of Islam does not stand up to scrutiny and is false. Therefore, Islam is false. Mormonism will now be evaluated. Mormonism is also known as LDS, which stands for Latter-day Saints. What is the central claim of Mormonism? The central claim is that Joseph Smith acquired the golden plates from an angel, which gave credence to the Book of Mormon. What is the evidence? The evidence is Joseph Smith's spiritual experience with the golden plates. What are the alternative explanations? One alternative explanation is that it is a conspiracy theory. People only make conspiracy theories if they acquire a reward for it, such as sex, power, or money. Joseph Smith did acquire money, sex, and power as a consequence of the golden plates during his lifetime. Therefore, it gives credence to the fact that the golden plates may have been a conspiracy theory. The other alleged eyewitnesses to the event did recant. They changed the story from being about physical plates to spiritual plates. The recantation is documented. Below is a quotation. According to the former Mormon Stephen Burnett's letter from 1838, he claims the following, quote, "When I came to hear that Marin Harris state in public that he never saw the plates with his natural eye, only in vision or imagination, neither Oliver nor David, the last pedestal gave way, in my view, our foundations." End of quote. It is a documented recantation. Therefore, the central claim of Mormonism does not stand up to scrutiny and is false. Therefore, Mormonism is false. Christianity will now be evaluated. What is the central claim of Christianity? The central claim is that Jesus was resurrected on the third day after being crucified by Pontius Pilate. This vindicated his lordship via the messianic prophecy in the Old Testament as seen in Psalm 16, verse 8 to 11, and Psalm 22. What is the evidence? The evidence are the non-biblical sources and the anthology called the New Testament. The New Testament was written in a genre of historical biography that was written the same century as the events transpired. The following are facts that are accepted by most non-religious and Jewish scholars. 1. Jesus was crucified by Pontius Pilate and placed in a tomb. 2. Afterwards, the tomb was empty. 3. Jesus was resurrected, is what the skeptics proclaimed. 4. The skeptical apostles endured violence for their proclamations. 5. The skeptical apostles were martyred for their proclamation. Question: what is the difference between Muslim martyrdom and the apostles' martyrdoms? The difference is that a Muslim only gets martyred for his theology, while the apostles got martyred for their eyewitness testimonies, something they saw with their own two eyes. This increases the veracity of the apostles' claims, especially since James, the brother of Jesus, only became a follower after the crucifixion, not before. According to the secular scholar B.D. Ehrman, quote, "The crucifixion of Jesus by the Romans is one of the most secure facts we have about his life." End of quote. According to the secular scholar Jacob Kramer, quote, "By far, most scholars hold firmly to the reliability of the biblical statements about the empty tomb." End of quote. According to the secular scholar D.H. Van Dalen, quote, "It would be extremely difficult to object to the grave story on purely historical grounds, even if we assumed that it served the purpose of checking an incipient grave cult. That would not explain how the story arose in the first place." End of quote. According to the secular scholar Michael Grant, quote, "The historian cannot justifiably deny the empty tomb, because if we apply the same historical criteria that we use elsewhere, then the evidence is firm and plausible enough to necessitate the conclusion that the tomb was indeed found empty." End of quote. According to the scholar Gary Habermas, quote, "Of these scholars, approximately 75% favor one or more of these arguments for the empty tomb." End of quote. According to the secular scholar Gerd Ludman, quote, "It may be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ." End of quote. There are several hypotheses that attempt to account for the facts above. Each hypothesis will now be evaluated. 1. The Swoon Theory. The Swoon Theory states that Jesus only fainted on the cross and did not actually die. The Swoon Theory is false because crucifixions are lethal. It is impossible to survive a crucifixion. Jesus was dead. In John 19, verse 33 to 34, after the heart of Jesus was pierced by a spear, quote, "Immediately blood and water flowed out." End of quote. When blood and water flow out from the heart, a person is dead. 2. The twin theory. The twin theory states that a twin was crucified in place of Jesus. It's mainly advocated by Muslims. The twin theory is false, since the crucifixion of Jesus is mentioned by Josephus, Tacitus, the Talmud, Lucian, and the New Testament, to name a few. 3. The mass hallucination hypothesis. The mass hallucination hypothesis states that the apostles acquired a mass hallucination. The mass hallucination hypothesis is false, since hallucinations are unique to individuals. Hallucinations cannot be seen in a large group. The psychological data simply does not support that. In addition, it is not possible to touch a hallucination. Additionally, if it was a mass hallucination, then the body should have been in the tomb. Since the tomb was empty, the mass hallucination hypothesis is unable to account for this fact. 4. The theft hypothesis. The theft hypothesis states that the apostles stole the body. The theft hypothesis is false, since the apostles do not have a motive for stealing the body. They had already denied Jesus when he was alive. After the crucifixion, the apostles thought that Jesus was an impostor. 5. The legendary hypothesis. The legendary hypothesis states that the resurrection is a legendary development and a later construction. The legendary hypothesis is false, since the New Testament was written in the 1st century, which is the same century as the events transpired. Something is only legendary if it gets written more than 1 century after the event transpired. Therefore, the resurrection is not legendary. 6. Conspiracy theory hypothesis. The conspiracy theory hypothesis states that the apostles made up the resurrection. The conspiracy theory hypothesis is false, since the apostles did not acquire compensation for spreading the message. They acquired the opposite, namely persecution and death from the Jews and Romans. For example, the apostle Paul had power when he was a Jew, and then lost power when he became a Christian. Therefore, the apostle Paul does not have an ulterior motive. 7. Mass grave hypothesis. The mass grave hypothesis claims that Jesus was placed in a mass grave. The mass grave hypothesis is false, since crucifixion victims were buried in tombs in Judea. We have archaeological evidence of crucifixion victims being buried in tombs in Judea. 8. The resurrection hypothesis. The resurrection states that Jesus was resurrected for real. The resurrection hypothesis is true, since it is the only hypothesis that adequately explains all of the facts above. Since Jesus really did rise from the dead, we can trust what Jesus said, including what he said about the authority of the Bible. In light of the historical evidence, the Jewish scholar Pincus Lapide stated that, quote, "If the defeated and depressed group of disciples overnight could change into a victorious movement of faith without a fundamental faith experience, then this would be a much greater miracle than the resurrection itself." End of quote. Lapide stated that the only explanation is that the resurrection happened for real. Quote, "I accept the resurrection of Easter Sunday as a historical event." End of quote. According to the former atheist philosopher Anthony Flew, quote, "The evidence for the resurrection is better than for claimed miracles in any other religion. It's outstandingly different in quality and quantity." End of quote. Since the central claim of Christianity stands up to scrutiny, Christianity has the highest epistemic probability and should therefore be selected. Christianity is true.
Okay, so that's the video played in full context. That he's done a great job of giving a nice, short, concise synopsis, and yet very informative as to some of the main claims about other religions and how we can compare them to Christianity and that sort of thing, and the evidence that we have for that. So the first part, by way of review, is he brings up his methodology. And here I don't have too much to say. It's his method. He lists out 3 criteria that he's using to judge each of the religions. And essentially, he's giving what's the best explanation. Is it, when we're evaluating Christianity, the hypothesis that Christianity is true is better than the alternative explanations or alternative hypotheses that posit that the religion or the religion's claim is false. And further, as we'll see as we get through the video, he's going to say, well, Christianity does this, and it's unique in this regards. All the other religions fail to come out as the best explanation compared to alternative explanatory hypotheses. So this is a traditional abductive or Bayesian approach that scholars like to use. I myself have used it in several of my arguments, so of course I'm fully on board. And he has 2 other criteria, so he's looking at the date of the writing. Of course, so it's a kind of a bibliographical test in some ways. So he's saying, well, when was the writing dated to? Is it so soon? Does it possibly reflect eyewitness testimony, or is it later legendary materials? And this speaks again to, well, is this religion, the truth of this religion or the religion's claim, more likely or a better explanation than alternative explanations about legends or myths or something like that, where it's not historically accurate information that's preserved in the religious writings. And then finally, he's evaluating it based on conspiracy theories. So again, this is, this makes sense. I mean, if a religious claim is based on a conspiracy theory as an alternative explanation, and we're assuming that in this religion's case, that's a better explanation than positing that the religion is true or that the religious claim itself is true based on the evidence, then you would go with the conspiracy theory, and this would hurt the case for the truth of that religion. So that's his methodology, not too much to say on that. Let's move straight into his first case against the first religion here, Buddhism. What does he say about that?
Buddhism will now be evaluated. What is the central claim of Buddhism? The central claim is that reincarnation perpetually occurs, where the aim is to reach nihilistic oblivion called nirvana.
Okay, so the first part here, in terms of the central claim, not so much about Buddhism and that sort of thing specifically, but one point that I want to make here by way of review is for each of these religions, he's going to be saying, well, here's the central claim. So with Buddhism, for example, he says it's perpetual reincarnation to reach nirvana. That's the essential claim of Buddhism. Later on in other religions, for Christianity, for example, it talks about it being the resurrection and stuff. So I think he's absolutely right that it is a central claim or an essential claim of Buddhism that there's perpetual reincarnation and your goal is to escape that, to reach nirvana, to become an enlightened Buddha, an enlightened one. So he's right there. And I think he gets essential claims of the various religions correct, more or less. But first thing, there's 2 questions here that I just want to point out. So number one, you have to ask, well, number one, is this in fact an essential claim of the religion? And how do you determine whether it's an essential claim? I think he does pretty good here. He's definitely right about Buddhism. This is an essential claim that the religion makes. If it's false, that falsifies the religion. But it's not the only essential claim. So sometimes he lists, like Jesus' resurrection, for example, with Christianity. Well, there are other propositions or other claims that are also central or essential to the truth of Christianity, the truth or falsity of it. And it comes up with Islam and some of the other religions. So I would just want you to clarify, Harry, that it's a central claim. And I get what you're doing here is that, well, you're singling these essential claims out because purportedly by the religious proponents, these are purported to be the evidential essential claims. These are the claims that we can prove, or the religious proponents at least claim, they say they can prove with the evidence that these are true, versus other essential claims where, like we don't have direct proof that Jesus was God or divine or something like that. So you're saying you're focusing on these essential claims in particular for each religion because the religious proponents say, and we can prove this. We've got evidence that this claim in particular is true. But yeah, I just wanted to note that religions sometimes have multiple central or essential claims. It's not just one kind of thing, and maybe they can prove one or more of them. Maybe in one religion, people say we can prove 2 of them, or we can prove 3 of them, or something like that. So just wanted to clarify that. Nothing you've done wrong in the video or anything, but yeah, let's move on to the next point here and focus in on Buddhism in particular at this point.
The central claim is that reincarnation perpetually occurs, where the aim is to reach nihilistic oblivion called nirvana. What is the evidence for reincarnation? The cited evidence of reincarnation is Ian Stevenson's studies about children with memories of past lives, allegedly.
Okay, so I'm going to interject again. Sorry about that. But I do have a very important point here to raise for you in your video here, Harry, and as well for the audience and that sort of thing. So there is one issue here that comes up. So you're saying, look, reincarnation is an essential claim of Buddhism. And there's evidence for this. We know Buddhism is true. Why? Because of Dr. Ian Stevenson's studies proving about children having memories about past lives. And I've kind of cited Dr. Ian Stevenson's research on this front myself in some Skeptics and Seekers shows and that sort of thing. And there are some cases that are impressive, at least at face value, I would say. And there's things that I think atheistic naturalists would have to contend with a little bit. So the point here that I want to get into before we start evaluating this evidence is what I call the issue of subsumebility. So let's pretend for the sake of argument that no, reincarnation has been proven 100%. They're right. This evidence works. It's correct. Reincarnation is a fact of life. Just for the sake of argument. Well, does that really prove Buddhism? No, not necessarily. This is my problem. It's called subsumebility. Why is it that Buddhism would be proven true even if reincarnation is 100% a fact? Hinduism also teaches reincarnation. In fact, they did so chronologically prior to. They did so first. There are other Eastern religions that believe in reincarnation. So how is proof of reincarnation also translating into proof that Buddhism is true? Maybe Hinduism is true. Maybe some other religion that teaches reincarnation is true. So you would need some way the evidence itself is underdeterminative. It doesn't speak as to which religion is authenticated by its being true. And that's the fundamental problem here, I would say, is that this isn't a religious authenticating event or religious authenticating evidence or line of evidence that says, yes, Buddhism has been authenticated to be true. We don't know. There's no reason to think that Buddhism would subsume the evidence from the Hindu religion or something like that. So my kind of notion on subsumability is that, look, the first religion chronologically first to claim a given miracle or given event or something like that, like reincarnation or something like that, gets it, unless a later religion has a sufficient reason to subsume that evidence as authenticating it uniquely as opposed to other religions. And in this case, with Buddhism, I've studied the evidence for reincarnation years ago. It's been a long time, but there's just no reason to privilege, even if we grant it, there's no reason to privilege Buddhism over Hinduism. They haven't passed my criteria of subsumability, which is part of my religious context criterion. In my premise 8 of my 11 premise argument, criterion C looks at the religious context, and I basically say that, number one, the given miracle or event or something like that allegedly proves a religion is true has to be sufficiently attached to a specific religion in this case, actually, I think you have proven the evidence for reincarnation would be sufficiently attached to Buddhism. It is an essential aspect, but it's also sufficiently attached to Hinduism and other Eastern religions that teach reincarnation. Then secondly, it has to serve to authenticate the religious text and that sort of thing. Well, once again, the religion itself. Well, once again, yes, this is an essential claim of Buddhism. So finding out that reincarnation is true, that would serve to authenticate that Buddhism is true. But once again, it would also serve to authenticate Hinduism is true. And then we finally get into subsumebility. Basically, for me, the event under question can't contradict its religious texts and or just its doctrines in general. Sometimes religions don't have texts; they just have oral traditions or something. So basically, it can't. This event or thing, this piece of evidence that's been proven to authenticate the religion or whatever, can't contradict the other background religious doctrines or beliefs that are inherent to that religion. So if Buddhism, it's like saying, well, we have evidence for reincarnation. That's an essential belief of Buddhism. But Buddhism has this other belief that entails that reincarnation wouldn't be happening. So there would be a contradiction there. If that happens, then Buddhism can't subsume the evidence for reincarnation to count as authenticating it. Instead, Hinduism keeps it. No, the evidence for reincarnation authenticates Hinduism, not Buddhism. So that's my first criterion. It's kind of a coherence criterion for subsumebility. Whatever Buddhism wants to subsume, in this case reincarnation, that has to be coherent with all of its other set of inherent beliefs and doctrines as well. Well, that's not a problem here for Buddhism. Secondly, the subsuming religion would have to have an independent evidence that authenticates it as being true and doesn't authenticate the other religion. And then thirdly, overall, all the positive and negative evidences combined, Buddhism would have to be 50.01% proven or more proven to be true, whereas the other religions like Hinduism are 50% or less. They're not more probably true than not. So in that case, that's how we determine, well, would Buddhism, a religion that came after Hinduism, chronologically speaking, would that get the evidence from reincarnation authenticating it versus the original religion, Hinduism or something, getting it? And unfortunately, if that's all we have, then there's no reason to say that Buddhism can subsume the evidence for reincarnation for itself. We assume the default is it counts to the first religion, chronologically speaking, that claimed reincarnation as evidence for it. So that's the way I would see that there. So even if they're successful in proving reincarnation, that does nothing. That doesn't prove that Buddhism is true. Okay, so let's get into his evaluation of, well, is there evidence for reincarnation or not?
The cited evidence of reincarnation is Ian Stevenson's studies about children with memories of past lives, allegedly. There are severe methodological issues of Stevenson's studies, and Stevenson himself has admitted that all cases have severe flaws. Even if someone assumes that the data in Stevenson's study is valid for the sake of argument, there are several alternative explanations that can account for the data better than reincarnation. One naturalistic alternative explanation is Morphic Resonance, which is a naturalistic process where self-organizing systems inherit a memory from previous similar systems by genetic similarity. Another naturalistic alternative explanation is akashic field and retro-recognition, where all human experience becomes part of a collective memory bank of the humankind to be read out again and again. Another naturalistic alternative explanation is memory bundles, which explains why so many memories are connected to a geographic region and connected to deceased family relatives. Another naturalistic alternative explanation is mental ocean theory, where consciousness is like an ocean and cups are sporadically taken out and eventually will lead to overlap, which explains why some memories overlap. Another naturalistic alternative explanation is mundane explanations, such as jealousy of the opposite sex. One supernaturalistic alternative explanation is demonic possession, which explains why certain children eventually forgot their memories and knew where their bodies were after death. Therefore, the central claim of Buddhism does not stand up to scrutiny and is false.
Okay, so a couple things to mention. So I love this. He did a very thorough job in terms of, Harry, in terms of assessing Buddhism and the evidence for reincarnation in particular from Ian Stevenson. So he has two objections. So he has, number one, in the first place, the raw data. There are questions pertaining to the raw data that Ian Stevenson provides, and there are problems with the cases that are used as supporting evidence for reincarnation. Secondly, he says, but let's forget about that. Let's just take it for granted that, yeah, these cases are what they purport to be. Well, does that prove that reincarnation is true? And he says, well, no, there are alternative explanations. And on that front, I thought he did a very good, thorough job here. I learned some things. There are certain things I've heard of some of these. For example, demon possession. In a Skeptics and Seekers show on Satan and demons or spiritual warfare, I made the argument that Dr. Ian Stevenson's purported cases or evidential cases were actually supernatural demonic possession was a better explanation relative to reincarnation for explaining all of the data that we had. And, he lists off various explanations. Some of these alternative explanations or hypotheses I hadn't heard of. So that was great. I learned something new. And I think that's awesome, that there's explanations I haven't even considered or heard of before. One complaint about your video, I would say, is provide sources, like a link or something or a paper that or a book or whatever source you used for each of these explanations, because I want to learn a little bit more about them or something. So, maybe provide a link in your videos as to the sources that you're getting some of these alternative explanations from. That's a bit of feedback there. But other than that, I thought that your presentation about refuting, do we actually have evidence for reincarnation there's problems with the cases, and even if there weren't, there's problems in that alternative explanations are readily available. We don't have to say, yes, this proves reincarnation. Here's where I have sort of an issue with what you say in the video. You kind of mention these alternative explanations, and then you say, well, see, that proves that reincarnation is false, and by in turn, Buddhism is false as well. And I actually don't think that that's a warranted conclusion based on what you present in the video here. So in the first place, I've already agreed with you that it is a warranted inference to make. If reincarnation is false, then Buddhism is false, because reincarnation is an essential claim of Buddhism. Buddhism can't be true as a religion as a whole if that essential element turns out to be provably false or something like that. So that part of your inference is correct. But where I disagree is that you haven't proven that reincarnation is false, at least not in what you presented. You presented various alternative explanations, and you hinted at some problems with the cases used to support the reincarnation hypothesis. But you didn't give any reasons in the video to say that, well, the reincarnation hypothesis is false or even probably false. You just kind of listed off, well, here's a naturalistic explanation, here's another explanation, and you didn't give any reason for privileging one explanation over the other. And because of that, you can't make the argument that Buddhism is false or that reincarnation is false. You just have to say, well, look, you haven't proven that reincarnation is true based on the evidence presented, because there are equally plausible or equally viable explanatory hypotheses outside of reincarnation that equally explains the data that we have. So what you would need to do is something like what I did in my Skeptics and Seekers show on Satan, that's posted up on RSM somewhere, but I actually gave additional reasons to think that the demonic possession hypothesis, or that alternative, is more probable relative to the reincarnation hypothesis. And then you can say, if you've got a reason to say that reincarnation hypothesis is improbable or wrong in some way, impossible or something like that, only then can you say that, well, reincarnation is false or probably false, and by in turn that means that Buddhism is false or probably false. I didn't see you make that case in the video, so that's something that's kind of lacking. You didn't have a warranted inference to the claim that Buddhism is false or that reincarnation is false, just by pointing out that they're equally valid. Presumably, you're saying they're equally valid explanatory alternatives and stuff like that. So you needed to do a bit more. Other than that, I thought it was great. So let's move on from Buddhism to the next religion here.
Polytheism will now be evaluated. Polytheism includes Hinduism, ancient Egyptian mythology, and ancient Greece mythology, to name a few. What is the central claim of polytheism? The central claim is that their gods have interacted with human beings. What is their evidence? Their evidence are written records about the exploits of the gods. What are the alternative explanations that can account for the data? One alternative explanation is that the written records were written in the genre of mythology, which is when something is written in the distant past without a specific time and space. Therefore, the document is not historical. Another alternative explanation is that the supernatural events in the written records are legendary developments. The written records were written down several centuries after the alleged events transpired. Therefore, the events are legendary. Another alternative explanation is that since the polytheistic gods are internal of time and space, the gods were used as replacements for natural phenomena. For example, Zeus was used to explain lightning. In light of scientific revolution by Isaac Newton, John Kepler, and Robert Doyle, among others, the explanatory power of the polytheistic gods became negligible. Therefore, the central claim of polytheism does not stand up to scrutiny and is false. Therefore, polytheism is false.
Okay, so by way of assessment of polytheism here, so the first thing I would want to say is I think there could be some dispute about whether or not the central claim is, as you say, for polytheism. For example, there would be Hindus who might question whether a literalistic understanding of all those polytheistic gods is real or not, and that sort of thing. But I get what you're saying. Like you have certain versions of Hinduism or certain versions of polytheism in mind, and they do posit the interaction between gods and men in a direct sort of fashion, and that's the central claim that you're wanting to test. For example, Zeus takes on the form of a bull and copulates with a woman, or takes on the form of gold dust, or the gods and goddesses entered the earth and did stuff, came down to the earthly level and engaged with human beings in certain magical or supernatural type ways. And what's our evidence for this? It's the historical documents. So this is what you're trying to assess. Is it true that gods interacted, presumably in some remarkable way, with human beings in human history? And do we have reliable historical records that attest to these divine engagements, so to speak? Okay, so on this front, you present various alternative explanations. For example, the genre of mythology, that's not the same as doing history or biography, like the Gospels of Jesus, for example. So the aim of these records isn't meant to be historical accurate records of what happened historically. It's just mythology. It's made up. Secondly, there's legendary developments that occur over time. Then thirdly, the gods are internal to space and time. So basically, this was your kind of the hypothesis that the gods were invented or made up as myths in order to explain the laws of nature and stuff like that. Like, oh, thunder. Oh, I know, Zeus. There's a god who gives thunder and lightning and that sort of thing. So obviously this has the same problem here. You're just presenting alternative explanations without presenting a reason for favoring them over and against taking it to be historically accurate, right? So, okay, there's an alternative explanation that these are myths and not history. Well, that raises the question, yeah, but is it mythology or not? So being charitable to you, I think what you're doing with these alternative explanations is you're claiming you're not presenting it in the video, because obviously it's a 17-minute video. Let's be fair, that's not enough time to be totally thorough. But I think what you're trying to say is not that there's just this equally plausible explanation, but that we have proof that these alternative explanations are probably true relative to the taking the central claim as accurate. So you're saying, look, we have proof that this is the genre of mythology as opposed to the genre of history, ancient historiography. So therefore, these stories about the gods interacting with human beings are probably myths. They're probably false. They didn't happen in human history. Same deal with the other stuff. So I think you're presenting these alternatives, and it's implied in what you're saying that we have proof that these alternative explanations are probably true. Therefore, the written records are not recording historically accurate events about the gods interacting with humans. Therefore, the central claim of polytheism, that the gods interact with human beings in human history, is probably false, or is false, kind of thing. And if that's the case, taking it that way, I definitely agree with what you're saying, that this argument is very, very well done. Obviously, it's just a matter of you presenting your evidence. Well, what proof do you have that it is, in fact, the genre of mythology, or that there were legendary developments that related to the gods interacting with human beings? And that's where, if you're going to engage with a polytheist, you would need to get into those details. You can't just assert, yeah, it's just the genre of mythology. No, obviously, a polytheist is going to object to that, so you're going to have to get into it with them on that. But yeah, otherwise, well said. I obviously agree with you fully. I think they are myths. They're legendary developments, and there's definitely some aspects of some of the stories about these gods are based on human beings wanting some kind of explanation for, oh, they saw thunder, they can't explain it. Zeus did that. Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. So that's my take on polytheism there. Let's move on to Islam next.
Islam will now be evaluated. What is the central claim of Islam? The central claim is that Muhammad acquired the Quran from an angel, which stated that Jesus was a prophet, and Jesus did not die on the cross, among other things. What is the evidence for this claim? The evidence is the written record named the Quran. What are the alternative explanations? The Quran was written in the 7th century, which are several centuries after the life of Jesus, and is a time when the eyewitnesses of Jesus were absent. Therefore, the Quran is not historically reliable when it comes to the life of Jesus. The Quran contradicts earlier non-biblical sources and the New Testament. The Roman historians Tacitus, Lucian, and Josephus, and the New Testament all claim that Jesus claimed to be God incarnate. The New Testament records that Jesus did die on the cross, which is the scholarly consensus. Therefore, the central claim of Islam does not stand up to scrutiny and is false. Therefore, Islam is false.
Okay, so what's my take on this? So looking first at the central claims, I think that, so you gave a minimalist definition, so that's good. So you recognize there are additional essential claims to Islam. But the ones that you want to look at are, number one, Muhammad acquired the Quran from an angel, which stated that Jesus was a prophet, meaning just a prophet. He wasn't divine or anything like that, is included in this. And Jesus did not die on the cross. Now, here's, I think your take on Islam, this was the weakest out of all your evaluations of the other religions. And believe it or not, this second part, Jesus did not die on the cross, I don't think we can prove that that is an essential claim that the Quran makes or that Islam makes through the Quran. That might be shocking because definitely the majority opinion of Muslims, if you ask the random Muslim on the street, they will say, yes, Surah 4 says Jesus did not die on the cross. The Quran says it. And throughout all of history, the majority of Muslim scholars would say this. And, when we get to the resurrection part, you'll hear this is why Muslims say, oh, there's a twin, or there was a supernatural swoon theory, and stuff like that. So it's definitely a viable reading, but just be aware that there's debate on this. And in particular, I've been convinced that I don't think we can prove on a balance of probabilities that the Quran does teach Jesus did not die on a cross. And there's a great article by Gabriel Said Reynolds called The Muslim Jesus, Dead or Alive? And it's a scholarly peer-reviewed paper that was published. And I'm going to include that article on my blog site for this video. So, please click on my link in the video description to my blog site. And Harry, go ahead and read this article. Believe it or not, I was convinced by it. I'm now agnostic myself as to whether the Quran actually teaches that Jesus wasn't crucified as opposed to he wasn't crucified by the Jews or something like that. But regardless, even if I'm wrong, like I said, the vast majority of people who've read this section of the Quran disagree with me for sure, and disagree with Gabriel Said Reynolds here. So if you're not convinced by it, great, but just recognize there is some debate about whether this is the fact that Jesus did not die by crucifixion. That's debatable, whether that's an essential claim from Islam found in the Quran or not. So again, it's a short video. I don't expect you to go into that much of a debate and that sort of thing, but recognize that if you are trying to develop a case or be a little bit more thorough, you're going to have to answer this question and prove that Jesus not dying on a cross is indeed an essential claim found in the Quran. And you're going to have to interact with Said Reynolds here. I'll include that. That's my first point. So the evidence for this is that, we have the written record named the Quran. The Quran itself is evidence, and this is popular among Muslims to say, I would like a little bit more clarification. Well, what do you mean? In what sense? Is it the beauty, the poetic beauty of the Quran? Is it the written? It seems to be the written record. Again, you're treating the Quran as a historical source, attesting to Jesus not dying on the cross, and the fact that Jesus was a prophet. So I'm going to concentrate more on that, more so than the claim that Muhammad got the Quran from an angel, because obviously that doesn't interact with the points that you're saying are problematic with Islam. It's more about what does the Quran say about Jesus, and that's a problem, basically. So let me focus on the claims about Jesus here. So in the first place, you present alternative explanations. I'm not sure that these are actually alternative explanations or hypotheses in themselves, like written in the 7th century. The Quran was written in the 7th century, absolutely, or later perhaps. And there wasn't written, no eyewitnesses of Jesus wrote the Quran, absolutely true. That's not so much an alternative explanation. That's more kind of a problem with the central claim, the Islam hypothesis, saying that it's probably not true that this happens. And also you mention it contradicts the non-biblical sources and New Testament sources. So again, that's not an alternative explanation in itself. It's just saying that the explanation that Muslims give is probably false, type deal. So as far as it works, written in the 7th century, no eyewitnesses of Jesus. So let's be putting on my Muslim cap here. Does this say anything? No, not necessarily, not in and of itself, because again, we're talking about potentially divinely inspired sources here, a divinely revealed book. So if we're being fair to the Muslim, just pointing to the date, it's written in the 7th century, and there were no living eyewitnesses who wrote
down the Quran or recorded the Quran in written form and that sort of thing, that in and of itself, I don't think disproves the Quranic claim. Because again, God can do that easily. I mean, we've got in the Bible, we have the same problem. We have documents being written down centuries after the fact, even on a conservative evangelical dating of some of the Old Testament books, for example. So yeah, that's not really an issue for me. The second one is a huge issue, right? So it contradicts non-biblical sources and the New Testament. So being as charitable as I can to the Muslims, well, of course they know that the Quran contradicts the New Testament, and they say, well, that's not a bug, that's a feature. That's of course the New Testament has been corrupted, and these non-biblical sources, they're not inspired like the Quran. So the contradictions come about of corruption, and the Quran was God's way of correcting that and saying, no, this is what was originally revealed, kind of thing, right? So that's the claim of the Muslims. So I think obviously a little bit more work would need to be done here, and I know that you have the background knowledge of saying, well, look, the contradictions in this case make it improbable that the Quran was the Quranic claim of an inspired correction or recorrection of the corrupted written records. That's improbable, right? And most secular historians would say that. Yeah, you always look, these documents, the New Testament is written within decades by actual eyewitnesses. If you're going to judge on a balance of probabilities, you should trust the New Testament over and against a 600 or 700 year later book writing later on and just claiming to be inspired without any proof. At least you don't provide any proof or evidence outside of the Quran as a historical record in this video. So that's all I can respond to. Obviously, if a Muslim presents other evidences that prove the Quran was divinely inspired, well, that would change the game. Then I don't care how late it was written, if we can prove it's probably inspired through prophecies or scientific foreknowledge or whatever claim that the literary patterns in the Quran, if there's some reason that succeeds in going, yeah, that was probably inspired, and then that would count in favor of the Islamic corruption thesis type deal, right? But obviously, in the absence of that, we don't have that. None of those are successful. Definitely wear my Christian hat. That's what I believe, having studied the evidence. I don't think there are any successful Islamic positive evidences on a balance of probabilities. And based on your video, all we have is the Quran as a written historical text. That's it. There are no other evidences for me to take into consideration. Then, yeah, we go with the earliest documents. The New Testament are the earliest documents, some of them provably written by eyewitnesses. So yeah, we would automatically privilege that over and against the Quran written hundreds of years later with no other proof that it's divinely inspired or something like that. Additionally, the fact that non-biblical sources that you mentioned corroborate the New Testament's version of events and discount the Quran's version of events, that definitely helps. One thing I would say with the non-biblical sources and even with the New Testament, though, in terms of the contradiction, there could be a difference between fact and interpretation of fact, right? So a Muslim could come here and say, well, of course, the New Testament and Josephus and all that said that Jesus was crucified. In your video here, Harry, you're kind of like assuming a secular standpoint and just sort of assuming, and that's what happened. They said it happened, and that's what happened. But maybe Josephus or the New Testament misinterpreted and got it wrong. They saw Jesus' twin up on the cross. And so, of course, they wrote down that Jesus was crucified. They were tricked. They were deluded. They thought it was Jesus sincerely, but they were wrong. It was his twin brother. Or if there's a supernatural, remember, Muslims aren't naturalists, right? Maybe if there's a supernatural swoon theory, well, definitely look to Josephus or look to these people that were watching Jesus up on the cross. He swooned. It looked like he died. They believed it. So they record that he died on the cross, contradicting the Quran. But the Quran has secret inspired knowledge. He didn't really die. He just supernaturally swooned and then came back to life, kind of thing. So there are some nuances here that I think would need to go into this in order for these claims to work. And it's not necessarily the case that we can just reason like secular historians and just we automatically always believe the earliest sources. I think a little bit more needs to be done. But I take your point that definitely, in the absence of any reasons supporting the Quran's version of events, and just given the evidence of the earliest sources saying what they say, on a balance of probabilities, we should say that, the Islam claim is probably false, absent some kind of supernatural input of some kind. And without any reason for supposing a supernatural input, we should go with the simplest explanation, which is just the New Testament claims are correct. Jesus was, in fact, crucified. He probably was crucified, just as Christians say, and Islam is probably false in its, if the Quran claims that Jesus was not crucified. That's my take on that. So let's move on to the next religion here.
Mormonism will now be evaluated. Mormonism is also known as LDS, which stands for Latter-day Saints. What is the central claim of Mormonism? The central claim is that Joseph Smith acquired the golden plates from an angel, which gave credence to the Book of Mormon. What is the evidence? The evidence is Joseph Smith's spiritual experience with the golden plates. What are the alternative explanations? One alternative explanation is that it is a conspiracy theory. People only make conspiracy theories if they acquire a reward for it, such as sex, power, or money. Joseph Smith did acquire money, sex, and power as a consequence of the golden plates during his lifetime. Therefore, it gives credence to the fact that the golden plates may have been a conspiracy theory. The other alleged eyewitnesses to the event did recant. They changed the story from being about physical plates to spiritual plates. The recantation is documented. Therefore, the central claim of Mormonism does not stand up to scrutiny and is false.
Yeah, so not much to say here in terms of Mormonism and the golden plates. It's pretty standard. I agree 100%. The conspiracy theory is an alternative explanation. And given the evidence, it's at the very least equally plausible. I would say we actually have enough evidence to say that it's more probable than not. It's very probable that the conspiracy hypothesis explains the data for the golden plates rather than supposing that that story was true. And that's further buttressed and supported by those recantations, documented recantations. Joseph Smith was a known fraud and that sort of thing. Well, I'm going beyond what you say in the video, but let me just say, I fully agree with your points. And I think that these do disprove that central claim of Mormonism about physical golden plates corroborating the divinely revealed Book of Mormon and that sort of thing, what he got from the angel. Good job on the Mormonism thing. There's nothing really for me to add to that. So, all right, so let's move on to the final religion that you evaluate. The winner, yay, Christianity. What do you have to say about that?
Christianity will now be evaluated. What is the central claim of Christianity? The central claim is that Jesus was resurrected on the third day after being crucified by Pontius Pilate. This vindicated his lordship via the messianic prophecy in the Old Testament as seen in Psalm 16, verse 8 to 11, and Psalm 22. What is the evidence? The evidence are the non-biblical sources and the anthology called the New Testament. The New Testament was written in a genre of historical biography that was written the same century as the events transpired. The following are facts that are accepted by most non-religious and Jewish scholars. 1. Jesus was crucified by Pontius Pilate and placed in a tomb. 2. Afterwards, the tomb was empty. 3. Jesus was resurrected, is what the skeptics proclaimed. 4. The skeptical apostles endured violence for their proclamations. 5. The skeptical apostles were martyred for their proclamation. Question: what is the difference between Muslim martyrdom and the apostles' martyrdoms? The difference is that a Muslim only gets martyred for his theology, while the apostles got martyred for their eyewitness testimonies, something they saw with their own 2 eyes. This increases the veracity of the apostles' claims, especially since James, the brother of Jesus, only became a follower after the crucifixion, not before.
Okay, so in this front, basically you're appealing to the resurrection of Jesus, a supernatural miracle that authenticated the truth of Christianity and vindicated Jesus as both God in the flesh, the Son of God, and the Jewish Messiah of Old Testament prophecy. What's the evidence for this? Well, it's the historical documents and recording historically reliable eyewitness testimony about Jesus' crucifixion and subsequent resurrection. And on this front, you kind of adopt the minimal facts approach of people like Gary Habermas, and you mentioned that there are certain key facts. So those include the empty tomb, that includes the appearances to the groups of apostles and that sort of thing, as well as skeptics, and you say James was a skeptic, and the Apostle Paul was also a skeptic. I don't know if you're including him in this. And look, they were willing to die for this, for their belief in Jesus' resurrection, and that's totally different because they were actual eyewitnesses. That's different from Muslims today who are willing to die for their theology. They're not eyewitnesses to Muhammad and getting divine revelation or anything. They're living hundreds of years later, and they just believe that happened, and they're willing to die for their non-evidenced belief. That's totally different what we have in the Gospels or what we have in the New Testament literature, because that reflects actual eyewitness testimony. It records down that the apostles, as eyewitnesses, they with their own eyeballs saw Jesus risen supernaturally by God as vindication, that he is the Messiah and God in the flesh and died for our sins. They were eyewitnesses, and yet they were willing to die. They weren't just lying about this. So that's your case in a nutshell. Obviously, I agree. I'm a Christian, but let me move on then. And moving on from, so that kind of establishes the historicity of the facts that we can get through evaluating the New Testament historically. And there is a bit of a, obviously your video, again, it's 17 minutes, so you don't go into it, but there are ways that we are able to glean, historians glean these facts from the New Testament documents. They're not just mindlessly believing whatever the New Testament says. Obviously, I mean, Bart, and you go on to quote various scholars like Bart Ehrman, Michael Grant, Garrett Ludeman, Gary Habermas. Some of these are Christians, some of these are atheists and skeptics and hate the Christ's truth and hate Christ and that sort of thing. They're living in rebellion to Christ, and yet even they wouldn't dare question these facts that you're mentioning, even though they would throw the New Testament as a whole in the garbage. So that's one aspect that you don't mention in your video, is that, well, there are criteria or ways or methods that professional historians use to glean data from historical texts and sources like the New Testament and say, well, this historically happened. We can prove that this historically happened. And that encompasses the facts. That's what you're saying. These facts that you list off are some of those facts that we can glean from the New Testament. Okay, so from there you go on to quote various scholars and experts, as I said, backing you up, of various varieties: atheist, agnostic, Christian, Jewish, and you're absolutely right. There was one thing, Gary Habermas's quote is a little outdated. It's no longer 75%. He's now saying 2/3 of the scholars would agree with the fact of the empty tomb of Jesus. So it has dropped a little bit from that paper That's a minor critique. It doesn't matter. You're quoting his paper he estimated it to be about 75%, back in the day when he wrote his resurrection research paper from 1975 to the present. Additionally, in terms of the historical facts, there is one qualification I'd like to mention here regarding the skeptic James. James, the brother of Jesus, literal brother, not a cousin, as the Catholics like to say, but had a resurrection appearance. And I think what you mentioned in your video, that he was a skeptic of Jesus, I think this is actually proven true. Up until the crucifixion of Jesus, he's not present for the crucifixion of his brother. And I think that does say he's probably a skeptic. He doesn't believe his brother. But I don't think that fact alone is good enough in terms of the way you're wanting to use him. In the same way Paul was a skeptic, what we have to ask is, can we prove that James was a skeptic at the time of his resurrection appearance? And I don't think we can prove that. We can prove that up until the time of Jesus' crucifixion, he was a skeptic, and after he died. But I don't think we know his mindset. Was he a skeptic at the time of his resurrection appearance or not? I tend to think he might have been more ambivalent. He started hearing claims of his apostles saying, he's risen, and maybe what's going on? This confused him, and it caused his skepticism to waver a bit. So I don't think we can prove that James was a skeptic at the time of his resurrection appearance, and that makes him slightly different than appealing to the mindset of the Apostle Paul. There are different naturalistic mechanisms that are available to explain James that aren't available in the same way for explaining the Apostle Paul, who definitely was a skeptic at the time of his resurrection appearance. So there's some nuance there that I just wanted to bring up in terms of arguing the case for the resurrection based on the appearance to James, resurrection appearance to James, for example. So let's move on. Great, so we've got these facts. Now you're going to develop your case at the explanatory level. Resurrection hypothesis. Do these facts prove the resurrection or not? So let's hear what you have to say on that front.
There are several hypotheses that attempt to account for the facts above. Each hypothesis will now be evaluated. 1. The Swoon Theory. The Swoon Theory states that Jesus only fainted on the cross and did not actually die. The Swoon Theory is false because crucifixions are lethal. It is impossible to survive a crucifixion. Jesus was dead. In John 19, verse 33 to 34, after the heart of Jesus was pierced by a spear, quote, immediately blood and water flowed out, end of quote. When blood and water flow out from the heart, a person is dead. 2. The Twin Theory. The Twin Theory states that a twin was crucified in place of Jesus. It's mainly advocated by Muslims. The Twin Theory is false, since the crucifixion of Jesus is mentioned by Josephus, Tacitus, the Talmud, Lucian, and the New Testament, to name a few.
Okay, so I'm just going to interject at this point with these two alternatives, just to point out a couple issues that I have. So in the first place, I think that you're too certain. With the Swoon Theory, you just kind of assert that it's impossible for someone to survive crucifixion. So that's not true. It is possible, and we have historical accounts in Josephus of two people, for example, surviving crucifixion. But I think, being charitable to your side, I think you mentioned John 19 and stuff, so you're trying to say, well, yeah, but those guys were just crucified for a little bit and then taken down. What you're saying is someone who went through what the Gospels describe Jesus has of going through, it would be impossible for them to survive. For that person to survive. And on that front, that's a lot more defensible if you make that qualified claim. It depends on those gospel details being correct, so you need to prove those additional details are true, which not all historians will grant you and that sort of thing, right? Like in terms of the blood and water and Jesus being pierced, scholars like Bart Ehrman might not agree with that fact. and stuff. So you'd have to do the extra work of establishing these additional details in the Gospels if you want to make a nuanced claim that it's impossible for someone who went through what Jesus went through as described in the Gospels to survive crucifixion. That's more defensible because it's definitely possible to survive crucifixion in general, under certain conditions at least. But even there, I'm a bit skeptical. I think it is possible. I don't think we can rule out that it's possible someone could survive being tortured and crucified. Being obviously the detail about blood and water coming out of the heart. That yes, he would be dead, kind of thing. But yeah, it's definitely possible for someone to survive crucifixion in general. Even a severe beating crucifixion, but it's extremely implausible. It's extremely, medically speaking, improbable. And we've done medical experiments. People have done medical experiments to prove what happens during crucifixion. And absolutely, it's very, very, very improbable. The swoon theory, naturalistically speaking, is virtually impossible. I would just nuance it just that little bit. I'm 99 to 99.99% certain that it's medically impossible for someone to swoon naturalistically and survive crucifixion, especially given some of the main treatment that Jesus received relative to other people. Like the people in Josephus who were just crucified for like half an hour and then were taken down. They weren't beaten. They weren't scourged. They weren't up there for hours and stuff like that. And they only survived barely with the best help of the best medical professionals of that day. So definitely I hear your point here. Though remember, what about a supernatural swoon theory? Some Muslims might advocate that, and that's again a game changer. You don't address a supernatural swoon theory at all. You just go with this naturalistic version, which is fair enough. Cool, but yeah, maybe. What about a supernatural swoon theory? Do we have ways of ruling that out? Maybe there are theological objections that would make God a trickster god or something like that. Also, there are problems in terms of the naturalistic swoon theory. Even if it is possible, just slightly possible, there's a 0.01% chance that you could naturalistically survive Jesus' treatment on the cross, being tortured, scourged, and crucified up for hours on the cross, and yet you did survive. Well, then it's very, very, very improbable, and I would say impossible almost, virtually impossible, that Jesus would convince and appear before people and convince everyone that he'd risen triumphantly from the dead and been vindicated by God. No, he would need a medical doctor. He would be dying. He would be in agony. He would be in a pitiful state. The apostles, if they saw Jesus after he swooned on the cross and he appeared to them alive a few days later, they would be running for a doctor rather than proclaiming the resurrection of Christ. And that's an argument that goes back to D.F. Strauss, I think it was, who first made it. And it's absolutely a defeater for this naturalistic type swoon theory. That's ridiculous. In the same way, the twin theory. So I kind of addressed this with the Muslim kind of thing, that God could supernaturally make people think Jesus' twin was him on the cross. Again, same theological issues. That's improbable. Would God deceive people? Why would God allow? And if God didn't do anything and they were just tricked by a twin, why would God allow that kind of undue confusion where the apostles were so confused they're damned to hell now? They believed that Jesus rose from the dead, and as a result he was God in the flesh. And under Islam, this is a damnable heresy or something. Obviously, naturalistically, there's problems with the twin thesis that you are assumed in what you're saying here. Things like, well, wouldn't they recognize the differences? I mean, obviously, Jesus would have, when he met them and they mistook him for a resurrection appearance, he would have explained, no, that wasn't me on the cross. He wouldn't have had the wounds on him that Thomas would have supposedly have seen. So there's a whole bunch of details that needs to be worked out here, and I think I agree with you that once you get into the details, the twin theory and the swoon theory are improbable relative to the resurrection hypothesis. But I just wanted to mention that there's a little bit of work required here, and there's some nuances or different takes on these theories. There isn't just the swoon theory. There are multiple swoon theories, plural, or multiple twin theories, plural, that could be advocated, slight differences and stuff. All right, back to what you were saying.
3. The mass hallucination hypothesis. The mass hallucination hypothesis states that the apostles acquired a mass hallucination. The mass hallucination hypothesis is false, since hallucinations are unique to individuals. Hallucinations cannot be seen in a large group. The psychological data simply does not support that. In addition, it is not possible to touch a hallucination. Additionally, if it was a mass hallucination, then the body should have been in the tomb. Since the tomb was empty, the mass hallucination hypothesis is unable to account for this fact. 4. The theft hypothesis. The theft hypothesis states that the apostles stole the body. The theft hypothesis is false, since the apostles do not have a motive for stealing the body. They had already denied Jesus when he was alive. After the crucifixion, the apostles thought that Jesus was an impostor. 5. The legendary hypothesis. The legendary hypothesis states that the resurrection is a legendary development and a later construction. The legendary hypothesis is false, since the New Testament was written in the 1st century, which is the same century as the events transpired. Something is only legendary if it gets written more than 1 century after the event transpired. Therefore, the resurrection is not legendary. 6. Conspiracy theory hypothesis. The conspiracy theory hypothesis states that the apostles made up the resurrection. The conspiracy theory hypothesis is false, since the apostles did not acquire compensation for spreading the message. They acquired the opposite, namely persecution and death from the Jews and Romans. For example, the apostle Paul had power when he was a Jew, and then lost power when he became a Christian. Therefore, the apostle Paul does not have an ulterior motive. 7. Mass grave hypothesis. The mass grave hypothesis claims that Jesus was placed in a mass grave. The mass grave hypothesis is false, since crucifixion victims were buried in tombs in Judea. We have archaeological evidence of crucifixion victims being buried in tombs in Judea. 8. The resurrection hypothesis. The resurrection states that Jesus was resurrected for real. The resurrection hypothesis is true, since it is the only hypothesis that adequately explains all of the facts above. Since Jesus really did rise from the dead, we can trust what Jesus said, including what he said about the authority of the Bible.
Okay, so I like these points. I think it's a great summary of standard Christian apologetics today for the historical evidence for the resurrection. You'll get these theories, people like William Lane Craig, Gary Habermas, Mike Licona will kind of line them up and hit them out of the park, these various hypotheses and that sort of thing. Just a few comments I wanted to make. So in the first place, in terms of the mass hallucination hypothesis, I think you're right. I like this argument against the psychological plausibility of collective hallucinations. That's just impossible to happen. Although there are mitigating inducing things. No group, 2 people can share the exact same hallucination any more than they can share the same dream. But there would be, as a skeptic, there would be some nuance there. Well, what about social contagion and social influences that can help to coordinate and produce similar hallucinations within people? So yeah, I would refute that as well. So just understand there's there's nuance that can come in with these mass hallucination hypotheses. That's sort of the second point, is I wanted to make a lot of these things you're just kind of going with, well, there's only one version of the mass hallucination hypothesis, or one version of the theft hypothesis, whereby it's the disciples, the 12, the apostles who steal Jesus' body. Well, what about other variants of the theft hypothesis? Maybe a necromancer, as Dale Allison says, stole the body. He heard Jesus predicting they would steal the body in 3 days. He said, oh, here's my opportunity. And he went and stole the body on the third day, on the Sunday, to do, God knows what with. Or maybe it was another disciple of Jesus who heard his predictions and preaching, not a member of the 12, but another random disciple who was listening and decided, for one reason or another, he would steal the body on the third day, unbeknownst to the 12 apostles, or the main group of disciples who became the apostles and then believed in the resurrection of Christ. And for one reason or another, that conspiracy to steal the body never came to light. The guy was killed on the road back home or something, and never got to reveal that, hey, it was me, we stole the body, or something like that. Again, there are issues with even these versions. Obviously, we can argue that these are problematic in certain ways, and you would need to get into those details and debate those. But the main point here, for point of feedback for you, is maybe just acknowledge that there are variants of these different hypotheses. It's not, the theft hypothesis, the disciples stole the body and that's it. No, there are other candidates who might have stolen or taken Jesus' body out of the tomb. And we need to grapple with those as well, as possible naturalistic hypotheses. And as well with the mass hallucination hypothesis, I just wanted to add a thing here that's interesting towards me, is we don't have to hang all of our eggs in one basket, put all of our eggs in one basket in terms of proving that the group appearances to the 12 were a collective experience, for example. I think that's a good argument. Obviously, that's a main argument that all the Christian apologists use, including yourself, and I think it's a good one. It works. But additionally, I think there are arguments that don't require us to prove that the 12 apostles had a group multimodal appearance of Jesus in order to make the case. I think we can prove the resurrection, even if, so long as 5 to 6 of the disciples, a majority of the apostles, what would become the apostles, or the 12, had even individual at different times from each other. So it wasn't simultaneous. They had appearances of Jesus. This also proves the resurrection. And the way I do this is through a different aspect. It's because of they were non-glorious appearances, kind of using Jake O'Connell's argumentation, scholar on that, resurrection scholar who wrote a paper on that. And given the social contagion factor, at least one of them, if it was a naturalistic explanation, at least one of them would have had a glorious appearance, as was the Jewish expectation of Jesus' resurrection appearance. And so even if one or two had this hallucination that wasn't consistent with their expectations of a glorious resurrection body for Jesus, at least one or more of them would have had that. And given the Jewish expectations of the context, that glorious appearance tradition would have taken over. But instead, that's not what happened. So this suggests, well, actually, that's because Jesus did appear to them in a non-glorious form. It was a real supernatural resurrection appearance. So that's an argument that I use that doesn't require us to argue for a simultaneous collective group appearance of Jesus. I believe that. I think we can prove that based on the historical evidence. So that's an additional argument. But even if we couldn't, we would still have this non-glorious resurrection appearance type argument, so long as I can prove that 5 to 6 of the 12 had individual appearances of Jesus in a non-glorious form, and there's certain other features, that it was close up and it was recognizable. That's all I need. And that this argument, I argue, goes through. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there. The final point that I wanted to raise against this, and I think this is an Achilles heel, if you're a skeptic or something, against your case here, Harry. It's the fact that it's too simplistic. You don't take account of what are called combination theories, and I think that's what most skeptics would advocate for. It's not, so you, for example, you say, well, think of the mass hallucination hypothesis. Well, it's deficient because it doesn't explain, in and of itself, it doesn't explain the empty tomb. Yeah, so what? There's a combination. It was theft by somebody else, plus, not a member of the 12, plus. In light of seeing the empty tomb, this spurred within them certain hallucinations, and a mass hallucination. You can do like a combination effect. And again, there's different variations. So, for example, for me, I honestly think that apart from the appearances to the 12, all of the other appearances and the fact of the empty tomb do have equally possible or equally plausible naturalistic explanations, at least in isolation. So I don't think that the fact of the empty tomb proves there was a resurrection. There are naturalistic explanations. And then you can combine that with other naturalistic explanations. So, for example, with the appearance of the 500, we don't have a lot of details for that. Would it have been exactly the same? Maybe a mass illusion could explain that appearance. With Peter, maybe he had an individual appearance. Well, a grief hallucination could account for that. Same with Mary. Maybe Mary was suffering from a delusion. Maybe she saw the gardener, and after the fact, after she heard Peter say, well, I saw the risen Jesus, he spoke to me, or something, then Mary's like, oh yeah, that was Jesus, I saw him too, I saw Jesus. So it's kind of delusion after the fact. And the other women hearing Mary say that, well, we saw the gardener too, that we saw Jesus, that was Jesus this whole time. We just realized it now after Peter. So you can see there can be different combinations that fit together, or different variants of these theories that fit together to make a coherent combination hypothesis. And you didn't mention any of the combination hypotheses that are possible and that sort of thing. So I would have liked to see kind of a take on that. What about combo theories? Is there any way to tweak or modify some of these alternative explanations so that they can fit together in a conjunction, theft and mass illusion and delusion and and hallucination, or something like that? Is there a way to fit that together that works, or are all the combination hypotheses improbable due to reasons too? They can't fit together into a coherent whole. There are problems that apply to one thesis that make it impossible for the second explanation of the empty tomb to fit in, or something like that, or you know what I'm saying. So yeah, some work on that is I would have liked to have seen that, but again, in a short video, what can you do? I understand totally. It's 17 minutes, so it's not fair for you to ask you to have to deal with everything. But maybe if you just at least mention that there are combination theories out there that also need to be grappled with, and those are a little bit more difficult than just taking, it's this hypothesis or it's this hypothesis. It's all or nothing for each of these individual alternative explanations, as you call them. No, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. There can account for partial explanations, and different explanations account for other facts and stuff like that, and maybe they work together, and maybe it's plausible they all happened or something. So yeah, addressing that. But other than that, it's pretty good. Let me just see here if you have anything else. Yeah, no, that's it. You're finished. So overall, great video. I think you raise excellent points. I love the compare and contrast. We're taking seriously the claims of other religions, and more specifically, the claims of the religions that are claimed to be evidenced, and comparing that to what we have with Christianity, and finding that Christianity comes out on top. You have a sound methodology from what I can see in terms of how we go about evaluating these claimed religious evidences, and Obviously, I like your conclusion. I think that you are correct that Christianity is the only one that succeeds in this department. The other religions have fundamental problems, and there's just no provable evidence. Things where someone would be warranted or rationally justified in believing in these religious faiths, at the very least, not on the basis of the evidences that you present in your 17-minute video and that sort of thing. So yeah, overall, well done. And I'll just, the last word over to you to finish off here.
Accept the resurrection of Easter Sunday as a historical event. End of quote. According to the former atheist philosopher Anthony Flew, quote, "The evidence for the resurrection is better than for claimed miracles in any other religion. It's outstandingly different in quality and quantity." End of quote. Since the central claim of Christianity stands up to scrutiny, Christianity has the highest epistemic probability and should therefore be selected. Christianity is true. You might have